This is your daily dose of all things royal.
It is one big club, insiders. I have long said the establishment are still protecting Prince Harry. At this point, I would argue, did he ever really leave?
And I would say that that answer would be no. Prince Harry and this woman we're calling Meghan Markle really never left. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Lauren here, but excellent work on this video, because a lot of the things that are being discussed, as well as showing receipts as to how the establishment is still connected, very well laid out. The only thing that I disagree with here in this video is that I believe that this rehabilitation really started towards the end of October in 2024, using charity and vulnerable people as a shield to improve the brand. They both did it. Meghan used the children's LA hospital, and Harry was off in Africa with sent to Bali. I believe this was being done when it was known that it was likely Donald Trump was going to be winning the election. This is what I said back in October of 2024. Harry literally just came back from Africa doing his PR stunt with sent to Bali. He was also awarded at the same time times 100 climate. And then he was also in New York with Dr. Tedros sitting at some fancy dinner gala to stop children violence. Ironically, across town, while Biden was still president, we had all of these migrants being ushered in. And as I've shared with all of you, child trafficking was rampant. And you all know that when I called it out at the time, my guess is the establishment didn't like it because they were beginning to rehabilitate Harry's image during that phase of him being named Time 100, going off to Africa, doing charity stuff, getting photographed. And then you have this video going out talking about the hypocrisy of Harry literally being across town from where one of the largest hubs of child trafficking was going on. So, I'm guessing that they didn't like that I was messing up their attempts to begin rehabilitation of this fool's reputation and image to get him ready to come back home, because they know that this mission failed. And this is what I said at the time. After reading that and their summary of everything that this couple have done to the royal family and we have witnessed, how ridiculous is all of this? Now all of a sudden we have turned the tide and now Harry's trying to get back home. I truly believe it has everything to do with what their mission was in the first place when they came over here to the United States in 2020, which was to go ahead and help the Biden regime get elected into office, as well as beyond this censorship campaign in order to drive and push regulation. And being that they got called out and they didn't see Elon Musk buying Twitter, I think that foiled a lot of what they were planning on doing in clamping down on free speech. Also, Harry is not going to be protected here in the United States if Donald Trump gets into office, right? There's a lot of stuff that these two have done and have been involved with that I believe is catching up with them. Hence the reason why this little coward is running back to the UK, making it look like he misses home so much. He misses his family. And what did I tell everybody was going to happen when Donald Trump got into office? I told everybody that there was going to be a shift with Archewell Fugazi Public Charity, since there was going to be no more U.S. AID money coming in. I told everybody that it's likely that Harry and Meghan would be focused at the state level because they know they possibly could siphon taxpayer money through Newsom. And what did we see? We saw them with the LA fires. So likely within that whole fraud scheme that they had set up to help people who lost their homes, Harry and Meghan got paid. I also said that Harry and Meghan were going to be aligning with international bodies like the World Health Organization, like the UN. And I also said that this as ever, whatever business that Meghan has set up is not serious. Now I believe, and this is my opinion, that the establishment had been behind Meghan in setting up this smoke and mirrors business. And this was all to distance Meghan away from all the corruption that these two had been in the middle of during the Biden regime. It also gives this woman we're calling Meghan Markle the excuse as to why she can't move back to the UK. a good way of seeing Meghan out of this mission. Now, it's possible that they'll park her here and wait it out for the next 2 years until the next election cycle, to where, they're going to try again to get the person that they want into office so they can turn back on the money faucet. And this is why these globalists, including the royal family, are hell-bent on controlling the narrative and information that the public gets to see. So when we talk about this facade, the establishment has very much been involved here throughout this whole entire time. And since this mission failed, what do we see happening? We're seeing these narratives being forced out into the public around the king desperately wanting to see these grandkids and, the possibility of this reconciliation. We're seeing Harry saying he's so homesick and his purpose is really, being a prince and doing a life of service. Out of all the chaos that's constantly put in our faces, Harry and Meghan on the down low never strayed away from the agenda, an agenda that King Charles is proudly supporting out in the open. In yesterday's video, I talked a lot about the overlap between the royal family and Meghan and Harry, specifically with the Princess of Wales and Prince William, on the initiatives that they were working on, as well as the people that they were involved with, such as Melinda French Gates. And I pose this question to everybody: if the family feud was that severe, why would these organizations, or better yet, William and Catherine, choose to associate and engage with the very same people that are tied to Meghan Markle, if indeed this feud is really that severe? To drive home the point that I'm trying to make here about this not being what it seems, is that back in 2024, I want to say around the middle of 2024, Channel 5 in the UK began cranking out these propaganda documentaries like every month. There were like a total of 19 or 20 of them that had gone out between the middle of 2024 towards the end of 2025. As you can see on your screen, all of these titles retelling the story of Harry and Meghan. But what's interesting about each and every one of them, as we see Meghan and Harry as total failures, and there's an indication that there is acknowledgement of that in the titles of these documentaries, what each of these propaganda documentaries have done is, one, double down on this family feud, citing and using Prince Harry's book Spare as the gospel, but also rehabilitating Meghan Markle in justifying her behavior these last 6 years. While these propaganda pieces acknowledge the Harry and Meghan failures as well as their unpopularity, they justify why people have come to certain conclusions, and they give Meghan the benefit of the doubt. Some obvious glaring red flags that is consistent throughout all of these pieces: one, they never talk about the invisible children or how Harry and Meghan parent these children. They never talk about the feud that Meghan has with her so-called alleged family, as if like they never existed. And then they also don't talk about the political stuff. Never once in any of all of these so-called documentaries do they talk about Harry and his misinformation, disinformation crusade here in America, as well as knowing about January 6th. In fact, we see that the media never talks about that. And in my opinion, I think that is a huge red flag. It's highly likely that all of those that are involved with this so-called saga were told never to mention it again, since it's being exposed that the Democrats had a hand in staging this so-called coup. Also missing from these so-called documentaries is any discussion about the abusive Sussex squad. Boozy, Sarah Data, Ian Sexton all were a big part during a period in history these videos seem to completely omit, especially since they have Jack Royston pretty much featured in all of them, giving his take on what was going on during that time, but never once talked about how he amplified Christopher Boozy's report and how people online were being viciously attacked. So it's quite suspicious to me that you have all of these documentaries beginning somewhere in the middle of 2024, going on back to back to back, all the way up until towards the end of 2025. And then there's this announcement that Prince William and Catherine, that the Royal Foundation has hired Sarah Rose as the new CEO. Who is Sarah Rose? Well, she was the Former president of Channel 5, yes, the same Channel 5 that ran all of these documentaries justifying Meghan's behavior, but also former UK regional lead of Paramount. You know, that little media company that Meghan Markle and Harry are friends with the CEO, Brian Robbins, and his wife, Tracy, who was also featured on Meghan's With Love, Meghan shitflick series. So I asked this question of everybody again today. Why would Prince William and Princess Catherine involve themselves in the same circle that Harry and Meghan are hanging out in, as well as choose someone to run their foundation who had been responsible for putting out all of these propaganda pieces about someone they allegedly hate? What's even more peculiar, though, is that Sarah Rose became president of Channel 5 and the UK regional lead back on February 6, 2024, right as these documentaries were starting to get cranked out, and then goes on to work for the Royal Foundation in September of 2025, just as, the last couple of these documentaries were cranked out. I mean, I'm not saying there's a connection there, but it is kind of weird that within the window of time that she was working there, all of these so-called rehabilitation videos to justify Meghan's behavior have been cranked out. Again, I have to ask this question. If indeed there is this royal feud between the brothers and there is tremendous animosity between Meghan Markle and Princess Catherine, why would Princess Catherine and the Prince of Wales want anything to do with anyone who is in the circle or orbit of Meghan Markle, especially when it comes to running your business? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Sarah Rose knows Brian Robbins because she had to work with him. For me, this is just a little too close for comfort. The other thing that I find pretty peculiar, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, but certain players that were in this saga in Harry and Meghan's orbit and played some kind of role with, pretty much fooling the whole public, have been rewarded in some way, in some form from the royal family. You have Fiona McElwim, who received I think CBE. You have Rhiannon Mills, who came from Sky News to go work, I guess, as the press secretary or one of the press secretaries for the king. You have Emma Grede. She is an ambassador for the King's Trust. You have Ted Sarandos, who received an OBE. You have Katy Perry, who also is some sort of ambassador for King Charles. And now you have Sarah Rose, who's now the CEO of Prince William's organization. You almost have to question, is Jason Kanoff getting his award for his, work, or is he getting an award for the role that he played in all of this? And then you have King Charles with Amal and George Clooney, who, did you guys know that Amal actually has an award that's named after her that the King's Trust gives out? I think it's the Amal Clooney Women's Empowerment Award. Yeah, it makes you wonder. You have Emma Grede, who's now a King's Trust ambassador. One would think if there truly was a feud and this animosity with Meghan Markle, why would the royal family bring these people into their circle? I'll let everybody come to their own conclusions here, but this, for me, is just more evidence that supports why I say this looks more like a black operations, and they're trying now to bring Harry back home because his mission failed. I think many of us can agree in what we're seeing recently that there is a clear effort to rehabilitate both Harry and Meghan's reputations. And I believe, and this is my opinion, that the king is most definitely 100% behind supporting it. I'm struggling to bring William and Catherine into this because I don't want to think that they were a part of all of this, but with all of this stuff now, an overlap, how can you not question that as well? Now, isn't it something that the only president that got to meet the Wales children was Barack Obama? Let that sit with you for a second. Which brings me now to talking about this book, Finding Freedom. We're not going to actually talk about the lies in this book. We're going to talk about who commissioned it. Obviously, we already know that Harry and Meghan collaborated with Omid Scobie on this book in passing information to Scobie to put into this book of fiction, despite the media reporting that Harry and Meghan had nothing to do with the book, essentially lying to the public. I think it's really important that we recognize and acknowledge that Harry and Meghan are not the first royals to have collaborated with authors to put out these kinds of royal biographies. And the reason why I'm making a point to mention this is because all too often we assume that the royals have nothing to do with any of the information that goes into these books. And a lot of times it's probably happening in the same way that Jason Kanoff had worked with Omid Scobie. And the reason why it's important to make this point is because of the new book that has come out by Catherine Mayer called Divide and Rule. Released last week, the book goes into examining how some of the most famous women in British royal history, including Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I, Diana, Princess of Wales, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan, have been portrayed, compared, and often pitted against one another by the media and public opinion. This book argues that many popular narratives about these women are oversimplified or distorted and seeks to present them as more complex historical figures with significant influence on the monarchy. I'm going to tell you why I feel the palace has its fingerprints all over this book in efforts to rehabilitate this stupid bitch Meghan. First, let's talk about this author, Catherine Mayer. She's an American-born British author, journalist, activist, and speaker. She is also the co-founder and former president of the UK's Women's Equality Party. Let that sink in. She also held senior roles at Time magazine, the same Time magazine that is owned by Mark Benioff. She just so happens to be the author of the 2015 book, Charles, the Heart of a King. Catherine Mayer's engagement with the royal family dates actually back decades. She first met the then Prince Charles in 1985, and then over more than 40 years of documenting the monarchy, it gave her access to senior royals and members of the inner circle. Yeah. Her background positioned her well for in-depth royal reporting, including her earlier work as a journalist with Time magazine. This book that was written, that you see in front of you, involved direct access to the then Prince Charles. She had one 30-minute interview, a dinner with him at Dumfries House in Scotland, 2 off-the-record walks around the Dumfries House estate with Charles and other guests, and an additional off-the-record dinner at the same venue. During her time writing this book, she had multiple conversations with his friends, courtiers, palace insiders, and also critics. In addition, she also spent about 6 months shadowing the then Prince Charles and sat in on some private meetings, according to her. From this alone, it's obvious that King Charles has a level of trust as well as relationship with this specific author. And why this is important to point out is because of some of the things that this woman writes in this book that could easily be seen as part of the rehabilitation and rewriting history of this duplicitous duo. From what I gather, the biggest chapter in this book is the one about Meghan Markle. From the very beginning of this book, she goes in to explain why she calls Catherine Kate throughout the book. And then she goes into the sources and the people that she was involved with in writing this book. She says here, while I have met a number of recent or current royals and have even progressed to first name terms with a few of them, I would never mistake their weary acceptance of me hanging around in the course of research for the stirrings of friendship. This might seem an obvious point, but it's also an important one. Royals rarely speak for themselves, instead tapping up proxies, confidants, aides, reporters to get their messages out. It goes on to say, my research has been informed not only by primary sources, but a vast array and range of published material, historical and modern, books, academic papers, documents, articles, blogs, broadcast material, dramatizations, and podcasts. So pretty much all the information and propaganda that's been pushed out there, she has factored that into this book, but as well as talked to first-hand sources, okay? Okay, so let's go through this chapter because I want you to understand why I find this extremely troubling. You'll see what I mean in a second, but the chapter opens with a vivid recreation of Meghan and Harry's 2018 wedding at St. George's Chapel. It portrays the event as a hopeful fairy tale moment. Here you have a biracial American divorcee, feminist, an actress marrying into the monarchy with her mother, Doria, present opposite the Queen. The author here contrasts this optimism with the present reality. The couple, now living in so-called exile, wink wink, in Montecito, California, amid rumors of marital strain and palace plans to, quote-unquote, rehabilitate Harry if the marriage fails. And there it is, delicately placed in this paragraph. One theory is that Charles aimed to bring his errant son slinking back, with or without Meghan. Then there is this part, which appears to me to be a massive slip-up. Says here, the drama dominated headlines, giving brief respite from chilling news coming out of Wuhan. The Sussexes, racing to leave before national lockdowns, stopped flights, completed a last round of official engagements, departing not for Canada, but California. And there it is, another lie. Meghan specifically stated in the Netflix mockumentary that she had to rush back to get back to Archie, who was in Canada. At the time, it was being reported by all of the traditional mainstream media leftist magazines that Meghan was rushing back to Canada. 3 years ago, I said Harry and Meghan were already situated in California, and that this story that they fed us about Meghan rushing back to be with Archie is a lie, because Archie was already in California due to this lawsuit Harry and Meghan filed in March when they were there for the Commonwealth service. So my guess is Meghan and Harry panicked because they got wind that a photo was taken of baby Archie, not in Canada, but in California. If you go back to that video that I did 3 years ago, it clearly lays out showing that Harry and Meghan were not in Canada when they said they were in Canada. They were in California. And the problem with that is because it totally disrupted the entire narrative that Harry and Meghan wrapped their vicious lies around. So what this author is essentially doing is confirming that Meghan and Harry were in California at the time Meghan wore her Kermit Goes to Church dress. But what's concerning to me, though, is the first sentence of this paragraph. The drama dominated headlines, giving brief respite from chilling news coming out of Wuhan. So, was the Harry and Meghan Megxit saga all a distraction so people wouldn't be paying attention to what was going on with this virus? But even more concerning with this is, did the royal family know that this virus was about to shut down the entire globe? It kind of would make sense as to why Harry and Meghan would already be situated and settled in California. Now, the one thing that I do remember very clearly here in the United States under Trump's first term before COVID wreaked havoc was that the economy was up. Our market was up. Americans were thriving. And Donald Trump had illegal immigration under control. Things were going well, and there was a lot of talk that it was likely Trump was going to win a second term. But you all know the deep state and these evil globalists couldn't have that, which now puts these photos back into focus. So we're supposed to believe that the future king and queen are getting these snake bites where the people administering these so-called vaccines are not wearing gloves? This is the future king and queen. Why are they not wearing gloves? And then look at how this is being administered to Boris Johnson. So what the hell, folks? Again, like I said, everything is about optics with the royal family. It makes you wonder, because when you're looking at this, where is the needle impression into the skin? You would see some sort of dimpling, right? I mean, when you look at how we do it here in the United States, clearly the needle going into the skin, you can see the dimpling there. You can see that they're all wearing gloves, and you can see that they're squeezing the bicep. None of that is going on in those photos that I showed you before. So the new question that I have for today is, did the royals know that this virus was going to incapacitate the whole entire world to throw a wrench into this election? Because Harry and Meghan were well situated in California, and we know what they were doing over here. So going back to this author's paragraph, the last line, it says, the Sandringham Agreement designated this as a transitional period. They could yet return to the Windsor fold. Let me read that again. They could yet return to the Windsor fold. So this transitional period was, you were coming over here to help the Biden regime get into office, and there was the plan for them to come on right back. And I think this is where we saw Meghan going rogue, and that's why things went sideways. In addition to that, we had Elon Musk buying over Twitter, which exposed what these people had been doing to Americans. I mean, we experienced it ourselves, but, to have it fully confirmed in congressional hearings, this is why we saw such a dramatic shift to what the Harkles were focused on, and from there, it just sort of spiraled downward. I don't think that they saw that it was going to end up like this. I do believe that Harry and Meghan stayed in the United States because they believed that they were going to be able to get the online space under control. And we have seen how all of that played out, not in their favor, thus the reason why we're seeing this effort to rehabilitate both of their reputations. But it's not working because you have people like myself who have been there from the very beginning, who has lived it and was there every step of the way, calling out the hypocrisy, the contradictions, the lies, and then also exposing the bigger element to all of this and all of the parties that were involved politically that shaped the deterioration of this great nation and robbed the American people. So of course there is a plan to extrapolate these two from the United States before the kitchen gets too hot. Now, in my opinion, if Meghan does have some sort of blackmail hanging over the royal family's head, I don't think it has anything to do with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor or Sleazy E. I think it has more to do with what these two have been up to and involved with here in the United States. I mean, think about it. It's not a good look if it gets out that a prince of the UK acting on behalf of the crown to interfere with the United States 2020 election is going to be a good look for the palace. And in my opinion, I think this is why we're seeing this hard push of Harry going back to the UK and bringing these kids and hoping for reconciliation. They are definitely pushing down this path. And in this brand rehabilitation, we're seeing for both Meghan and Harry the removal of all the political stuff. When we talk about racism and we talk about, mis and disinformation that went along with all of these disinformation campaigns that they were putting out there. The so-called alleged Markle family drama was a disinformation campaign in itself. It is my opinion and personal belief that Thomas Markle Sr. was never intended to go to this wedding. It was a setup from the word go. And how we know this? Well, through Caroline Graham. Now, I said this before, the things that these journalists are not reporting on should be focused on. Why is it that nobody is calling this out? Why is it that nobody's saying, well, hey, Thomas, you made such a big fuss and we're so angry against the Daily Mail for posting those pictures of you in the cafe, thus ruining your alleged relationship with your daughter and causing you to miss the most important day of her life because you had a heart attack. Why would you be close to someone who was responsible for all of that heartache? My belief is that it was always part of the show. And in all of this rehabilitation work that's going on for these two, they conveniently leave out the fractured family that Meghan Markle allegedly has. Conveniently just leaves out all of that drama. It's consistent all throughout these documentaries, as well it's consistent in this chapter about Meghan. It briefly mentions the breach with Meghan's father and the paparazzi, and then the author asks why the promised joy scenario collapsed, and invites readers like myself to examine our own attitudes towards Meghan rather than accept the dominant negative views and what had been put out there into the media space, which a lot of it came from the Markle side. The chapter goes on to trace Meghan's background, her TIG blog promoting gentle activism, her Suits role, the engagement announcement, and early mixed coverage focused on the racist or classist undertones such as references to Compton or her exotic DNA. Of course, they're not going to let us forget about that article that was written in California, not in the UK, about her coming straight out of Compton. The chapter discusses her initial popularity peaking alongside Harry's, followed by a sharp decline, with polls showing strong negative feelings towards her returning to the UK. The author does defend against accusations of inauthenticity, phoniness, or being too Californian woke. So putting this in context, she is making this reference of this behavior clashing with the buttoned-up palace norms and compares them to tolerated gaffes by others, referencing Prince Philip. The chapter does argue that The successful modern royal women like Camilla, Sophie, and Catherine often succeeded because they stayed quiet and were deferential. But for Meghan, comparing her to the Little Mermaid archetype, her confidence, intelligence, and refusal to fully suppress her voice marked her as uppity in a classist racist system. This is the justification for why Meghan is so disliked. This is what the foundation of this woman's argument is, and it is making people see this in a different way, which, you can spin it however you want. Like, if people just rub you the wrong way, you don't have to like them. No one says you have to like them. A big bulk to this chapter addresses the bullying allegations, where it details Jason Knauf's email and its leak to the Times just before the Oprah interview, which Harry and Meghan called a calculated smear campaign. The chapter then immediately goes into talking about the broader palace dysfunction, giving examples from Charles's court, staff complaints, hierarchical culture. It also notes staff churn is common in startups and other royal households. She does talk about Jenny Offia, which was Meghan's lawyer, and quoted redefining bullying narrowly as the improper use of power, and stating that Meghan absolutely denies ever doing that, while adding she would not negate others' experiences. The author then asks whether alleged bullying justifies the relentless hatred directed at Meghan. The author does cover Meghan's account of suicidal ideation during her pregnancy, but doesn't cover the pregnancy itself. She goes on to talk about the HR department's response or lack of response, and parallels to Diana and others driven to the brink by media pressure. Media hounding is described as having become a national sport, with an economy of hate stoked by tabloids, palace leaks, and social media amplification. The chapter here portrays Meghan and Harry as naively optimistic about reimagining their royal role, developing a siege mentality amid resistance, and ultimately choosing a progressive new role outside full-time duties. In the later sections, they discuss the staff turnover, the nicknames that she received: Duchess Difficult, Dictator in High Heels, cultural clashes like curtsying, hugs, American directness, and the couple's post-royal ventures. The Netflix deals, the strong viewership for royal content projects, the cancellation of archetypes with Love Meghan, and as ever arranged, the chapter does end by questioning whether personal dislike for alleged bullying justifies hounding or replicating abusive behaviors at scale. The end to this chapter really does feel like reverse psychology. It says here, say you dislike Meghan and are prepared to argue that your response is reasoned, not visceral, that you are not part of a pack stirred up to feel this way. Say you believe that she bullied staff. Bullying is hateful, and her lawyer is quite right. Personal experiences should not be negated. Does this principle justify the relentless hatred meted out to Meghan, or instead replicate, at scale, the behavior you condemn? If we accept her hounding, whether by applauding her daily abuse as a form of natural justice or treating it as entertainment, we become part of the problem. So too do those who seek to defend her by similar means. You see? This entire chapter is definitely a clear, sustained attempt to rehabilitate Meghan Markle's public image. It gives her the consistent benefit of the doubt, humanizes her choices, and diffuses responsibility away from her onto the actual system called the institution. Also putting blame onto the media, palace culture, and the public pack mentality. And in this chapter, this author makes the public and also critics sound like the primary problem rather than Meghan's own agency and behavior. And the tone that I see here set is Meghan is this thoughtful, feminist, corrective, exposing all of these biases. But the selective framing with this author functions as complete gaslighting, man. It invites us, the reader here, to examine ourselves, right? And look inward as to we might be the actual problem for why Meghan is getting all of this hate. The one thing that's irritating here about this chapter is that it downplays how Meghan's Sussex Squad terrorists have targeted critics, journalists, and even family members online. The chapter does mention the online harassment in general terms, but frames it overwhelmingly as something done to Meghan, not something her side has contributed to or benefited from strategically. Overall, in my opinion, this chapter was nothing but gaslighting. The same kind of gaslighting that is seen in all of these so-called propaganda documentaries. They really are positioning Meghan as someone who's complex, who has the intelligence, and unfortunately was a bit naive going into all of this. Like, they really are painting this woman now as if she did no wrong and was only doing her best in the environment that she was placed in that was completely foreign. Now, I'm sorry, but this is not going to work. And these are the narratives that they're trying to drive home now. And what I think is being set up here is showing the differences between Meghan and this institution, how, yeah, she's not a bad person. She just didn't fit into this structure because she's this California free actress. And, we're not going to take away from who she is. And I do think that if this does go down the path of where they will separate, this is going to be one of the reasons for why they're separating. It's the culture clash and the differences in being able to, do the things that she wants that you can't do if you are tied into this golden cage that Harry seems to want to go back to. We're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out, but you can tell the effort that's being put in here to rehabilitate this woman's image and her brand to make her look not so nasty. I think we're at this point, if indeed this was a black operations that went sideways, then we do have to question all the other narratives, like, is Meghan really a bully? Now, one last paragraph here before I go. The author writes, the palace did order a probe into its handling of the situation, briefing at its conclusion that there would be changes in policies and procedures known to all members of staff and all members of the royal family, but that the details of these and of the process that led to them would remain private. Such discretion, though it smacked of a cover-up, was by now unavoidable. At this stage, to reveal the names and testimonies of complainants and witnesses would be to expose them to relentless media pursuit and the worst excesses of online harassment. So here's a question to make you think. Why would the palace not want to be transparent and show everybody the changes in this policy, even if it was generalized? I mean, they had no issue showing their new social media policy. Why is it that they couldn't show the public, especially since at the time it was very contentious around Meghan being a bully or not being a bully, and the debate on whether or not this was done on purpose to derail Meghan's Oprah interview? Why wouldn't the palace at least disclose some of the changes that they made to show that they're making an effort to appease Meghan? So then the next logical question that I have here is, why did the palace then go ahead and announce that the internal investigation or probe had been completed and that they will not be sharing the findings of this report? Why didn't they from the very beginning say that they were going to conduct an internal investigation, which is, pretty much internal and confidential? Right? Like, why did they need to make an announcement that they went ahead and completed this and then we're not going to share it with anyone? Unless maybe this too never happened. I think all of us are pretty fed up with the constant manipulation and jerking around. We were lied to. And don't think that the royal family's innocent, had no hand in this. They definitely were involved here. 100%. The question is, what is true and what is not? Because there have been so many inconsistent stories, and these journalists coming in and playing their role to manipulate the public. It's exhausting. I think the only thing that I got out of this chapter on Meghan and the retelling of events, there's a theory that Charles is aiming to bring his son home. I don't think it's a theory. I think it's a fact. I think Harry is in the process of being extradited out of this country and back home to the UK. The question is, can Meghan go with him? I don't think at this point she can. I don't think the public will welcome her back in any form, in any way, but I do think the continued brainwashing and constant media propaganda being pumped out there in this fashion, like you see just on Channel 5, all of these documentaries being put out there that pretty much are parlaying the same type of message, giving Meghan the benefit of the doubt, getting people to see this differently. I don't see this differently. If you're going to lie and manipulate, I'm not going to believe anything else. I'm not looking at this in any different lens or any different way. I don't like the games that were played here because a lot of harm came from it. And if indeed the palace and the establishment is behind this, then they too are to blame for everything that we have gone through. And that's why I'm not going to let this go. We will somehow get to the bottom of this one way or another, but what do you guys think? Do you agree with what I'm saying here? Do you see why a lot of this is so weird and not making sense? I'm asking you to have an objective perspective and just ask questions. If you can answer some of these questions that I have here, not make excuses for the royal family, but legitimately answer some of these questions that I really don't have any other explanation aside from this being a black operation. And that now they're trying to figure out how to move on to whatever the next chapter is. And that is getting Harry out of this country. At least that's what I hope is going on. But let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.